Title: On our anniversary, I discovered my wife's affair with my own brother. It started with a whisper, unraveled in a storage room, and left my world shattered. The day started like a dream. Our 10th wedding anniversary, a milestone I'd been looking forward to for months. The house was alive with activity, caterers bustling in the backyard, the kids darting around in their formal clothes, and the smell of pastries filling the air. Family and friends were arriving, filling the house with laughter and warm greetings. It felt perfect, almost. This whole celebration was my idea. I wanted to show Sophia how much she meant to me. 10 years of marriage deserved a grand gesture. I'd spent weeks obsessing over the details, booking a jazz quartet she loved, commissioning a replica of our wedding cake with its intricate sugar flowers, even selecting wine from the vineyard we'd visited on our honeymoon. Sophia seemed genuinely touched by it all, laughing as I stressed over every little thing. "You're such a romantic," she'd said, shaking her head fondly. And I was. For her, I was. But lately, something had been gnawing at me. A tiny, nagging doubt I couldn't shake. Sophia's phone never left her hand these days. She'd laugh at messages, claiming they were from coworkers, but she never showed me. Then there were the late-night gym visits. It wasn't like her to care much about fitness before. When I teased her about it, she'd smirk and throw back a comment about my growing belly, turning it into a joke. It felt playful. It felt harmless. And then there was Eric, my brother, my best friend. His visits had become more frequent lately, though I told myself that wasn't unusual. We were close. He'd always been the charming one, the successful one. People loved him. Sophia was no exception. But sometimes, the way they spoke to each other, the ease, the familiarity, it was unsettling. I tried to push those thoughts away, but little moments stuck with me. The way Sophia's phone would buzz late at night, and she'd glance at it before quickly setting it aside. The way she'd laugh at Eric's jokes, a little too easily. And then there was the night I overheard her whispering on the phone, "Don't worry, he'll never find out." When I asked her about it, she'd laughed nervously, saying it was about a surprise for our anniversary. "Stop being so suspicious," she teased. "You'll ruin your own surprise." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was a weight in my chest I couldn't ignore. By the evening, the house was buzzing. Sophia was radiant, moving through the crowd with effortless grace. Her laughter rang out, her smile lighting up the room. She had a way of making people feel like they were the center of her world. And tonight, I was desperate to believe that was still me. Eric was there too, commanding attention as always, spinning stories about his latest business trip to an admiring group of guests. "You've outdone yourself, bro," Eric said, clapping me on the shoulder as we stood by the bar. "This is one hell of a party." "Only the best for Sophia," I replied, feeling a swell of pride. But his words lingered. The way he said them, like there was a private joke I wasn't in on. Or maybe I was imagining things. I wanted to be imagining things. He raised his glass, a flicker of something in his eyes. "To 10 more years." I smiled back, but that flicker stayed with me. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe not. As the night wore on, I wandered through the house, making sure everything was running smoothly. That's when I noticed it. Sophia wasn't in the backyard, or in the living room. Eric was gone too. Maybe they're in the kitchen, I told myself, though doubt was already creeping in. The kitchen was empty. So was the study. It wasn't until I walked down the hallway near the storage room that I heard it. A low voice, then laughter. My heart caught in my throat. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. It could be nothing. Maybe Sophia was showing Eric where we kept the extra wine glasses. But why would they be whispering? Why the laughter? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. A part of me wanted to turn around and go back to the party, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, to cling to the image of the perfect evening. But another part of me, the part that had been second-guessing every late-night gym session and every stolen glance, wouldn't let me walk away. What if I was wrong? What if I wasn't? Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, and for a moment, I felt relief. The storage room looked just as it always did, dimly lit, cluttered with old boxes and random household items. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement. My stomach twisted. In the far corner, Sophia and Eric were standing close. Too close. Sophia's hand rested on Eric's arm. Her face turned toward his, her lips parted mid-laugh. Eric's easy, amused expression froze the second he noticed me. Sophia turned, her smile evaporating. Was that guilt in her eyes? Or something worse, annoyance? "Mark," she said, her voice too high-pitched, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My throat felt dry, and my heart was hammering so loudly I could barely think. The three of us stood there, locked in this awful silence, none of us daring to move. "We were just," Eric began, his voice steady but his eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape. "Sophia was showing me where you keep the wine." "The wine," I repeated flatly. "In the storage room." Sophia took a step toward me, her expression softening, like she was trying to calm a skittish animal. "Mark, it's not what it looks like. You're overthinking this." Overthinking. The word landed like a punch. All those moments I'd brushed aside, the whispers, the glances, the late-night gym trips, suddenly didn't feel like my imagination anymore. They had a shape now, a face. Two faces, Sophia and Eric. "I'm not." I started to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What could I even say? Instead, I turned and walked out, shutting the door behind me harder than I intended. I didn't go back to the party. I couldn't. The thought of smiling, laughing, pretending, it made me feel sick. Instead, I stepped out onto the back patio. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't clear my head. I gripped the railing, staring out at the yard where the kids were playing with their cousins, their laughter cutting through the chaos in my mind. For their sake, I had to keep it together. At least for now. The rest of the evening was a blur. I plastered on a smile, nodded at the right times, and let myself be carried by the current of small talk and congratulations. Sophia stayed close to me, her hand brushing against mine, her laughter louder and more frequent than usual. Eric, on the other hand, kept his distance, sticking to the far corners of the party. When he finally left, he muttered something about an early meeting and avoided my eyes. When the last guest had gone and the kids were finally asleep upstairs, Sophia turned to me with a tired smile. "We pulled it off," she said. "Everyone had a great time." I stared at her, searching her face for something. An apology, an explanation, anything. But her expression was calm. Too calm. "Did you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She frowned. "Did I what?" "Have a great time." She blinked, her confusion looking so genuine that, for a moment, I doubted myself all over again. "Of course I did. Didn't you?" I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, to drag every last secret out of her and lay it bare. But the kids were asleep, and my resolve wavered. Instead, I forced a smile. "Yeah, it was great." She hesitated, watching me like she knew I was holding something back. But then she nodded and went upstairs, leaving me alone in the dimly lit living room. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying every moment in my head. The storage room, her laughter, Eric's face. By the time I finally dragged myself to bed, the weight in my chest had settled deep, like a stone I couldn't shake. The days that followed were torture. Sophia acted like nothing had changed. She went about her routines, smiling, laughing, texting on her phone like always. But I couldn't stop seeing that moment in the storage room. I couldn't unsee the way she looked at Eric. I started noticing little things. The way she angled her phone away when she texted. The way her laughter came a little too easily when Eric's name came up in conversation. The way she seemed a little too eager to get out of the house some evenings. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find it. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't imagining this. And slowly, piece by piece, the cracks began to show. The first crack came on a Wednesday evening. Sophia said she had a late yoga class and wouldn't be back until 9. Under normal circumstances, I would have thought nothing of it. But after what I saw in the storage room, normal wasn't something I recognized anymore. At first, I tried to ignore the unease gnawing at me. I made dinner for the kids, tidied up the living room, and even sat down to watch a show I didn't care about. But by 7, my restlessness got the better of me. I grabbed my keys and told myself it was nothing. I just needed some air. But that wasn't true. I drove to the yoga studio, just to see, just to reassure myself that everything was fine, that I was overthinking like Sophia had said. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. The lights inside the studio were off, the doors locked. My chest tightened as I sat there in the car, staring at the dark windows. Maybe the class had been canceled last minute. Maybe she'd gone somewhere else. A coffee shop? A friend's house? The thoughts came quickly, none of them settling into anything I believed. I texted her. Hope yoga's going well. Miss you. Her reply came almost instantly. Just finished. Heading home soon. Love you. The words felt like a bucket of cold water poured over my head. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling. When she got home that night, I was waiting on the couch, pretending to read. She walked in with her gym bag slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. She smiled at me, that same warm, familiar smile that had always melted my defenses. Yoga was great, she said, dropping her bag by the door. I really needed it today. I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. That's good. You seem refreshed. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. Her lips were warm, her scent familiar. And yet, in that moment, everything about her felt foreign, like I didn't know her at all. I wanted to ask her where she'd really been. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders, look her in the eye, and demand the truth. But the kids were already asleep upstairs, and my voice felt trapped in my throat. The second crack came a few days later. I was folding laundry, a chore Sophia usually handled, but I needed something, anything, to keep my hands busy. As I sorted through the pile, a small slip of paper fluttered out of her jeans pocket and landed at my feet. It was a receipt. A coffee shop across town. The date? The same night as her supposed yoga class. The timestamp? Right in the middle of it. I stared at the receipt, my mind racing. People stop for coffee all the time. That was the rational thought. But why lie about it? Why not just tell me? I set the receipt down on the counter and walked away, my chest heavy with questions I wasn't ready to ask. The cracks widened after that. Eric had always been the kind of person who knew how to make himself indispensable. That was part of his charm. He'd call to check in, offer to help with errands, suggest family outings. For years, I'd admired him for it. But now, every gesture felt like something else. Calculated. Strategic. One Sunday afternoon, he dropped by unannounced while Sophia and I were cleaning out the garage. He showed up with his easy smile and a six-pack of beer, cracking jokes like he owned the place. For a moment, I almost forgot my suspicions. Almost. But then I went inside to grab water, and through the kitchen window, I saw them. They were standing close, their heads tilted toward each other as they talked. Sophia laughed at something he said, her hand brushing against his arm. It wasn't obvious. If I hadn't already been consumed by doubt, I might not have noticed. But I did. I didn't want to believe it. Even with the receipt, the messages, and the memory of the storage room, some part of me still clung to hope. Hope that I was overthinking everything. Hope that Sophia wasn't lying to me. Hope that Eric was still my brother. But deep down, I could feel it. The foundation of my life was shifting beneath my feet, crumbling bit by bit, and I didn't know how to stop it. The worst part wasn't the cracks themselves. It was pretending they weren't there. Sophia still kissed me goodnight, still laughed at my jokes, still held my hand in public. But every touch, every smile, felt like it was hiding something, and I was running out of ways to ignore it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Sophia, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every detail of the last few weeks. Her laughter, her excuses, the way she touched my arm like nothing had changed. I wanted to believe her so badly that it hurt. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the text messages on her phone. Miss you already. Tonight? Usual spot? I felt like I was being torn in two, half of me desperate for proof that I was wrong, the other half knowing deep down that I wasn't. By morning, I felt hollow. Sophia kissed my cheek as she left for work, her scent lingering in the air long after the door closed behind her. I sat there at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, staring at the chair where she'd been sitting just moments ago. When I finally got up, it felt like I was moving through quicksand. My body felt heavy, my mind numb, but I knew what I had to do. The private investigator's office smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper. The man across the desk from me looked tired but kind, like he'd heard more confessions than a priest. "I think my wife is having an affair," I said, the words scraping my throat on the way out. He nodded, his pen poised over a notepad. "Tell me what you know." And so, I did. I told him about the yoga classes, the coffee shop receipt, the way Sophia angled her phone when she texted. I told him about Eric, about the storage room, about the looks that felt like they meant something more. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Once I start, there's no going back." His words hit me harder than I expected. No going back. I thought about our kids, their laughter echoing through the house, the way Sophia tucked them into bed at night. I thought about our wedding day, the way her smile lit up the church, how certain I'd felt when I said, "I do." But that certainty was gone now. "I'm sure," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The days that followed felt endless. Every time Sophia left the house, my chest tightened. Was she meeting someone? Was she with Eric? The thought of them together, laughing, touching, was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Sophia, meanwhile, acted like nothing had changed. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, asked about my day over dinner, and laughed at my dumb jokes like she always did. But every interaction felt like a performance. At night, I lay awake, listening to her steady breathing, wondering what secrets she was keeping behind those closed eyes. Then, 2 weeks later, the investigator called. "We need to meet," he said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach drop. "Did you find something?" I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Let's talk in person," he said. "Tomorrow morning." My office. The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt, my mind racing with every possibility. I wanted to believe he'd found nothing, that he'd tell me it was all a misunderstanding, that I'd been paranoid for no reason. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The investigator slid a manila folder across the desk when I arrived. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. "It's all in there," he said gently. "Take your time." My fingers felt numb as I lifted the cover. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. Sophia, sitting in a coffee shop, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Across from her, Eric. His hand rested on hers, their fingers intertwined like it was the most natural thing in the world. I flipped through the rest of the photos, each one worse than the last. Sophia leaning into Eric as they laughed together. The two of them standing outside a motel, their heads close as if sharing a secret. The timestamp on one photo made my stomach turn. It was the night she told me she was at yoga. I dropped the folder onto the desk, my hands trembling. "I'm sorry," the investigator said softly. I didn't respond. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see it laid out in front of me, undeniable and unforgiving. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "What do I do now?" I didn't know how long I sat there after Sophia retreated to the couch downstairs. The bedroom felt unbearably quiet, like it was holding its breath. I stared at the empty space beside me, where she should have been, the sheets still faintly creased from the night before. I thought about her tears, her shaking hands, the way her voice had cracked when she said, "I love you, Mark." I never stopped. The words had felt like a cruel joke. If this was love, what was betrayal supposed to look like? At some point, I moved to the window, staring out at the dark street. The neighborhood was silent, the occasional porch light flickering in the wind. It struck me how normal everything looked, how normal everyone else's lives must be. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the kind of storm I was standing in. I envied them. I didn't go downstairs. I couldn't face her again, not yet. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Memories came rushing in, unbidden and sharp. Our first date, when she laughed so hard at one of my jokes that she snorted and turned bright red. The way she'd leaned on me during her father's funeral, clutching my hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The night we brought our first child home, both of us terrified and exhausted but so in love with the tiny life we'd created together. How had it come to this? The thought of Eric hit me like a second blow. My brother. The one person who had always been in my corner. The one who had been there through every stage of my life. I trusted him. I loved him. Now, when I thought of him, all I could see was his hand on Sophia's. His smile as he leaned in too close. Their shared secrets. I clenched my fists, anger rising like bile in my throat. How dare he? How dare they? The next morning, I found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Mark," she said softly when she saw me, her voice hesitant, like she didn't know if she had the right to speak to me anymore. I didn't respond. I walked to the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stood there, staring at the steam curling up from the surface. "I know you hate me," she said after a long silence. "And I don't blame you. I hate me too." Something in her voice cracked the shell I'd been building around myself. I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as the woman I had spent over a decade loving. The woman who had been my partner, my confidant, the mother of my children. She looked broken, and it hurt. "You don't get to hate yourself," I said quietly, setting my cup down. "That's too easy. You get to sit with this. You get to feel it, the way I'm feeling it." She nodded quickly, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I'll do anything, Mark. Anything to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "Do you think there's a quick fix for what you've done? For the lies? For him?" Her face crumpled, and she looked down at her mug, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to feel anger, to let it burn away the ache in my chest. But all I felt was exhaustion. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "I'm still me, Mark. I made a mistake. No, a terrible choice, but I'm still me. The woman who loves you, who loves our kids. I don't know how I let it get this far, but I never stopped loving you. Please believe that." I stared at her, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold onto the life we'd built, to the family we'd created. But how do you rebuild trust after it's been shattered? How do you forgive the unforgivable? "I need time," I said finally, stepping back from the table. I can't do this right now." "Mark," she said, standing up, her hands reaching out to me. "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "Just don't." The rest of the day passed in a fog. I avoided her as much as I could, throwing myself into small tasks around the house, cleaning out the garage, fixing a leaky faucet. The kids noticed something was off, but I forced myself to smile and laugh with them, determined to shield them from the mess their parents had created. That night, I sat alone in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. The photos were still in the folder on the coffee table, but I didn't need to look at them again. They were etched into my mind. I thought about what she'd said, how she still loved me, how she wanted to fix things. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to find a way back to the life we had before. But the anger, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all felt like an anchor dragging me down. As the hours ticked by, I realized I had a choice to make. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. Did I stay and try to rebuild something that might never feel whole again? Or did I walk away and try to find a version of myself that didn't feel so broken? The weight of that decision sat heavy on my chest as the first light of dawn crept through the windows. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, and I hated it. It felt so wrong, so out of place in the mess of my life. Light like that was supposed to feel warm, to bring clarity, but all it did was make the ache in my chest sharper. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee I'd made an hour ago and hadn't touched. It had gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The folder sat next to it, and I couldn't stop looking at it. Couldn't stop thinking about what was inside. Photos. Evidence. Proof of the life I thought I had crashing down around me. Sophia and Eric. My wife and my brother. I thought about the first time I saw them together, standing too close in the storage room at our anniversary party. That moment I brushed aside because, surely, it was nothing. Surely, I was imagining things. But it wasn't nothing. I thought about the yoga classes she never went to, the receipt for a coffee shop across town, the way she angled her phone when she was texting. All the pieces had been there. I just hadn't wanted to put them together. And now, here I was, sitting with a goddamn folder full of answers I never wanted, trying to figure out how to breathe through the weight pressing down on my chest. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this anymore. Caught in the in-between, pretending everything was fine when nothing was. I picked up the folder. My hands shook as I stood and walked toward the kitchen, where Sophia was sitting. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling faintly at something. When she saw me, the smile faded. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hand, and I saw her body tense. "Mark," she said cautiously, setting her phone down. I didn't answer. I walked to the table and dropped the folder in front of her. The photos spilled out, and I just stood there, waiting. Her face went pale. For a moment, she didn't move. Her hands hovered above the pictures like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch them. Finally, she looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" "I know," I said. My voice didn't shake, but God, I was trembling inside. "I know everything." She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting from the photos to me and back again. "Mark, she said. "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "Don't lie to me. Not again." Her face crumpled. Tears filled her eyes as she finally reached for one of the photos, staring at it like it might change into something else. Something innocent. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. I laughed bitterly, and it surprised even me. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated. "Sophia, you don't just accidentally meet my brother in a motel. You don't accidentally destroy your family." Her sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face as her shoulders shook. I wanted to feel something other than the heaviness. I wanted to feel the anger, but all I felt was the emptiness it left behind. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I asked quietly. "To me? To us? To the kids?" "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice muffled by her hands. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything." I didn't know what to say to that. What could I say? That it was okay? That I forgave her? I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "You're going to cut him off," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "No more calls. No more texts. No more sneaking around. If he's in the same room as you, you leave. He's done. Out of your life. Out of our lives. Do you understand me?" She nodded quickly, her tears streaming down her face. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll block him, Mark. I'll never speak to him again. I swear. And this is your last chance," I said. "If I catch you lying to me again, about anything, we're done. Do you hear me? Done." She nodded again. "I understand," she whispered. "I swear, Mark. I'll prove it to you. Please, just don't give up on us." I stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Remorse, maybe, or sincerity. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there was still something left to save, but I couldn't decide if I did. I left the house not long after. I got into the car and sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breath. The folder was still with me, the photos still in my head. I picked up my phone and dialed Eric. He answered on the third ring. "Mark," he said, his voice casual, like nothing was wrong. "What's up? Where are you?" I asked. There was a pause. I'm at Mom and Dad's." "Why?" "Good," I said. "Stay there. I'm coming over." "Wait, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shifting. I hung up. The drive to my parents' house felt like it lasted forever. My chest was tight, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger had settled into something cold and sharp. I walked into the house without knocking. My mom called out from the kitchen, "Mark, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I went straight to the living room, where Eric was sitting on the couch with a beer in his hand. Mark, what the hell? I didn't let him finish. I hit him. My fist connected with his jaw, and he fell back into the couch, stunned. Mark! My dad shouted as I grabbed Eric by the shirt and hit him again. Eric raised his arms, trying to shield himself, but I didn't stop. My fists landed over and over, fueled by every ounce of rage and betrayal I'd been holding inside. Mark, stop it! My mom screamed, grabbing at my arm. Tell them! I spat, wrenching away from her. My voice shook, but I didn't care. Go on, Eric. Tell them what you did. Eric wiped the blood from his nose, his face pale. Mark, calm down. Tell them. I roared. Tell them how you've been screwing my wife behind my back. The room went silent. Eric, my mom whispered. Is that true? His silence told them everything they needed to know. I looked at him one last time. You're dead to me, I said, my voice low and final. You're not my brother. You're nothing. If I see you again, I won't stop next time. And then I left. Sophia was waiting on the porch when I got home. She looked up when I stepped out of the car, her face filled with worry. Mark, she said softly, are you okay? No, I said honestly, but I will be. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward.